So welcome to another edition of Career Conversations. I'm Herda-Rapp. I'm the campus executive at the UW-Stevens Point at Wausau campus. And today, in this installment of Career Conversations, we're going to talk about social work. And lucky for you all, I have two social workers on this conversation today. And I will let them introduce themselves. We have Chelsea Block and Sarah Schwalbach. So Chelsea, could you tell us a little bit about yourself first?
Hello, I'm Chelsea Block. I am a certified social worker with Marathon County Department of Social Services. I currently supervise 2 voluntary programs, comprehensive community services, and children's long-term support. And I also have experience providing case management in youth justice and child protective services.
Awesome. And Sarah?
Absolutely. I'm Sarah Schwalbach, and I am currently in a contracted position working with Marathon County, mentoring a child in the Comprehensive Community Services Program, which is a mental health wraparound program. So we work on goal development and other things together.
Perfect. So I think we'll get into more of the details as we talk, but let me start with the first question. When and how did you discover your purpose? How did you become interested in this career choice? I don't know who wants to start first. This is the first time we've had 2 interviewees. So Sarah, why don't you get started first?
Sure. I actually went to school at UW Green Bay, and I went there for the purpose of becoming a special education teacher or a kindergarten teacher. And what I found really interesting is that you, of course, have to take general ed classes. And I just so happened to have taken a social work class. And I fell in love with the professor and all of her discussions. So it was actually in the very beginning, before I entered any program, that I took a social work class, and that fueled my interest. And that's where I knew I wanted to go, was social work.
How far into that, into your schooling, did you sort of have that experience, that revelation?
It was my sophomore year, so my second year. So I ended up being a 5-year student because I kind of switched my path my second year to do the social work.
Yeah. Good. What about you, Chelsea?
So I bounced around quite a bit educationally. I first went to UW Stout, then transferred to UW Marathon County, which is now UW-SP Wausau Center, and then ended up graduating from UW-SP. So I would say I went to school for accounting, health promotion and wellness, dietetics, and during my junior year of college at UW-SP, I started doing respite for a little guy who had quite a few diagnoses and some really challenging behaviors. And at the time, I mean, I really didn't understand that I was really doing social work at that time. And so while I was doing respite and providing services for him and for his family, I realized really how appreciated they felt by the services that I was providing. And so it was at that time that I decided to make the change and move into social work.
That's awesome, both of your stories, because I think a lot of times students feel like they have to have it all figured out before they ever get to college. And most of us that have completed a college education, a bachelor's degree, will tell you that we changed majors. I changed majors 5 times, and change pretty significant changes sometimes. But you land in the right spot eventually. It just sometimes takes a little time.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So can you tell me a little bit about your path to this this career? And even like through this career, how did you prepare? And then how did your career kind of transition even? Chelsea, do you want to start?
So for my path, I talked a little bit about providing respite for the little guy in Stevens Point. And one of the things I should have mentioned is that I really feel like things really came full circle when I moved to Marathon County and started providing children's long-term support and comprehensive community services, because I realized that was the program that I was hired under as a contracted provider, similar to what Sarah is doing now. But So when I did my internship through UWSP, I interned with Portage County Healthcare Center, working in the nursing home with the elderly. I absolutely fell in love with that. I had my heart set on working with the elderly population. And when I graduated, I had a difficult time finding a position working with the elderly. And I was fortunate to get a position with the county up north, providing child protective services, initial assessment, and ongoing case management. And through that position, I mean, it really opened my eyes to social work and providing services to children and their families. And also, so then when I transitioned from Oneida County to Marathon County, I transitioned to youth justice. And there were so many times, I think, when I was providing child protective services, I thought, I'm only going to work in child protective services. I'm not going to work with teenagers. And then I got the position working with teenagers in youth justice, and I fell in love with working with that population. And I'm like, okay, I'm never going to work with anybody besides teenagers. And then the position providing voluntary case management opened up, and I fell in love with that. I mean, I think a career path with social work, there are so many opportunities to provide services and supports to all different populations of people.
It sounds too like you've had lots of opportunities to grow and change and develop and find new interests and stay really interested in the profession too.
Yes, absolutely.
How about you, Sarah? What was your path?
So sometimes I think when I think of social work and the different people that I went to school with, sometimes our own experiences drive where we want to go, especially in the area of social work. So when I was in school, I actually had a grandfather who passed away from cancer. So when I first started social work, I had it in me that I wanted to be a hospice social worker so that I could work with families who were also struggling with loss. And I took the hospice social work placement, and it wasn't really a good fit. I liked everyone that I had worked with. I liked that field, but I didn't feel passion working in that area. So then I also did a field placement with Marathon County Department of Social Services, working in child protective services, and I found more passion in that area. It was a better fit for me and what I wanted to do and the population that I wanted to work with. I just felt like I had more to offer to the people that I was working with. And during my placement, actually right towards the end, a position opened for comprehensive community services program, and it was a foster home social worker. So I applied to be a specialized foster home social worker, and what that meant was that I would be able to work with kids in foster homes who had mental health diagnosis or behavioral challenges. And that I was really, really excited to do. And I got the position. So I worked for Marathon County for 8 or 9 years in that position. Loved it. Loved the kids I was working with. And then I decided I wanted to start having kids. And when I started to have my first son and my second one shortly after, my priorities kind of changed where I didn't feel like I had the best work-life balance. So I took a part-time position with Marathon County, which then opened me up to the CLTS program. So I was doing both children's long-term support, which is kids with a long-term disability, as well as kids with mental health diagnoses. I struggled. I really struggled because my passion was not working with the children's long-term support program. It was working with kids with mental health diagnoses. So during a good year of struggling and trying to find myself and what would work best for me, I had talked with my supervisor to take on more of the kids with mental health diagnoses because that's where I felt the most passionate in. And then after my second child, we kind of had some struggles with him in the hospital. I decided to resign and be a stay-at-home parent. that was difficult. I had a lot of crying because I was losing or leaving a job that really defined me and that I was really, really good at and that I really enjoyed. But little did I know, a whole bunch of opportunities then opened up for me while I stayed home with my boys. So I had a bunch of different contracted positions with the county, and continuing to work with some of the kids with mental health diagnoses, as well as worked in a private agency where I could continue to do some of the goal development and some of the social skills groups that I had ran over the summer.
This is really helpful. I like how you guys have demonstrated the flexibility, the tremendous range of opportunities, the settings that social workers work in. I mean, there's social workers at hospitals, right? And all over the place. And also the way then that your careers have changed and evolved. That's really helpful for students that are thinking about a career, to know, to see that kind of flexibility and opportunity for growth. So thank you for that.
Great.
Good job. So if you could tell me next, like, what do you think are some qualities or some attributes that successful social workers have?
So I think one of the main qualities that a successful social worker should have is good communication skills, because you can take on any job and you can learn policy, and you can learn procedures, but no one can teach you how to have good communication skills. So when you're working with other individuals, I think that that's one of the most important things to have, is the communication and compassion in working with other people.
I think what Sarah said, kind of going along with that communication, really the ability to build rapport and to engage, build relationships with people. And a huge part of that is communication. As a social worker, my goal is to help people improve their lives. And they aren't going to make those changes for me. They need to make those changes for themselves. So part of that is, how do we work with people? How do we communicate with them and build relationships with them to let them see the importance of making those changes to better their life? So for me, I agree with Sarah with communication.
And
Go ahead, Sarah.
And sometimes also building those relationships with people, you need to be able to not necessarily put your values aside, but put your judgment of others aside, and really be able to see people as people and that they deserve respect. So you can't go into any social work position already judging people and feeling as though you know best, because you don't. Whether you're working in CPS, mental health, CLTS, everybody knows more about their own life than what you do. So you need to be able to be a really good listener and take what they are saying to help them develop goals or plans with them that they can be successful at. Because if you are going to march in knowing everything, they will fail, because they need to be able to be invested in their own lives.
Good. What does an average day look like on your jobs?
I don't know if there is such a thing as an average day in social work. A lot of times we make jokes, and at work, it's, I think, part of the fun of the job. Like, you really can't make some of these things up. You really can't walk into work thinking like, oh, today I'm going to get my case notes done. Today I'm going to get my court report done, because we're dealing with real lives, real people, and we just don't know sometimes what you're going to walk into. And for me, that is really part of the fun of the job. It's exciting to be able to experience all different things. Sorry, I really struggled with that one. I hope you can edit me out.
No, that was a good answer. What about you, Sarah?
kind of to play off of what Chelsea said, every day is very different. I've always worked with kids, and I've never been the type of person to sit down and be like, let's just talk and tell me how you're feeling. Like, I've always done a lot of different games with kids, or we've gone out in the community, trying to build rapport and connections to have better conversations with kids and work on goals better. Also, where I'm currently at and in working with the girl that I'm working with right now, we have a whole lot that we're working on. So sometimes I may take her to a store and we might go through and do price comparisons on different things to help her so that when she turns 18, other times we may go around looking at Christmas lights because that was something that she missed in her life. And that's something that's helpful for her right now. Recently, she was really struggling with her foster parents. So I sat down for 45 minutes and had almost a therapy session with her and the two foster parents to try to work out the struggles in the home and what would be helpful to make the placement and the home environment successful. So every day really varies. And sometimes you may be in the middle of a crisis and other times you might be playing board games. So it just really depends on what that day brings you, because you're working with people, and especially in the position that I've worked in, people with mental health diagnoses, where some days are ups and some days are lows. So you never know what you're going to get.
But also probably a mix of like in the office work and out of the office work. Yeah.
Yeah. So for the programs that I've worked in, you have like recovery plans, assessments that are due every 6 months or every year. And then you also have case notes that need to be completed, ideally daily, but ideally doesn't always occur. And then also like crisis plans for kids or adults who may need a plan to follow when they're in crisis, as well as just the daily interventions that you have, whether it be a phone call or a home visit.
I would
No,
say
one
there's
thing-
definitely,
Go ahead.
oh, sorry.
No. Go ahead, Chelsea.
I was just going to say, I think in social work positions, there's definitely a really great mix of in-office work and in the community work, in homes, in schools. There really are so many opportunities to build relationships with other professionals and to learn from them. And sorry, can you just edit me out there too? You are editing this, right? Like, I don't know why I'm struggling so much with this one.
Well, no, people will see you as a real person. And you have to be a real person if you're going to be a social worker. Like, you can't just be a
Oh gosh.
flat poster board figure. Could you tell us a little bit about the degree requirements to be a social worker? Either of you? I should ask you specifically. Chelsea, could you talk about that?
Yes. So to be a social worker, specifically, I can talk a little bit about specifically with Marathon County. So a bachelor's degree in social work or a human services related field is required, as well as a social work license. The social work license needs to be obtained within the first 6 months of employment. One of the things I didn't talk about is I also have my master's degree, and I received my master's degree from UWSP in community and organizational leadership. And I think that that also assisted me with obtaining my current supervisor position, just having that extra competitive edge. So not just my education, but also my experience that I brought into that application process. Currently at Marathon County, on my team specifically, I would say probably half of the social workers have their master's degree in social work. And a master's degree in social work can also open up so many other opportunities. One of the lead worker on my team has her LCSW, and she provides clinical supervision for us, for our team, through the CCS program. And she is a wonderful resource. And right now she is also working with another member of the team on getting her clinical hours for her LCSW.
Good. Not a lot of people know this because it's actually very, very new news, but we're going to be the site of the UW Green Bay social work master's degree starting this fall. So, so we now have the bachelor's degree in social work here, and then through a collaboration with UWGB, we'll have a master's in social work on this campus as well. So
I have read about that and I've heard about it, and I'm personally excited about it. I've actually gone back and forth quite a bit about applying for my master's degree and kind of looking at getting some clinical hours potentially to get an LCSW. So I've put a lot of thought into it. And that's, I think, just part of social work having so many different opportunities. So I think it's a great resource for our community. As an agency, we have had quite a few field placements. We have one right now, and we have really enjoyed the interns, and hopefully they've enjoyed their experience with us. And, you know, like Sarah talked about, she was hired on after her internship. We also have quite a few other staff who have interned with us, and they've done such a nice job that during the application process, they were very competitive, and they have current positions with our agency.
Awesome. So what advice, Sarah, what advice would you give to someone that's considering social work as a field, or somebody that's just entering social work?
So Chelsea and I have actually talked about, I don't remember if it was like advice or maybe if someone had told us this sooner, but we had talked a lot about just making sure you have really good self-care. Because at some point in social work, you're bound to either feel burnt out or compassion fatigue or secondary traumatic stress. You're dealing with people's lives, and you're dealing sometimes with trauma and crisis. And if you don't do good self-care, then it's easy to fall into an area where you're starting to feel down or burnt out. So self-care is really, really important. And sometimes part of self-care might be your work environment and what that work environment is like. Fortunately for myself, I had a really good supervisor where I struggled with self-care, and I gave my all to the kids that I worked with. I would do 7 a.m. home visits, and I would stay till 7 o'clock at night. Home life was kind of non-existent. I poured my heart and soul into the kids. And I had a really good supervisor who said, Sarah, you need a vacation. Sarah, you need to take time for yourself. So self-care is really important. And if you're not able to prioritize that for yourself, have supportive people around you who can help you prioritize that.
And for me, I think some of the best advice that I could give would be to just be very open-minded about all of the different career opportunities that social work can bring. You know, I talked a little bit about how when I interned, I couldn't ever see myself working with a different population besides the elderly. And then I moved into child protective services. I never saw myself interviewing kids about some really traumatic incidents that happened in their life. And I fell in love with doing that and never thought I was going to do anything else. And then I moved on to youth justice and fell in love with teenagers, and then moved into voluntary services. And I agree with Sarah, you know, I've been very fortunate to have supervisors and managers that have really encouraged me to be open-minded and to think about other positions and other ways that I could build my career. So I think that is one of the big things, just being really open-minded about working with all different populations.
It's great advice because I imagine that a lot of people that go into social work, like as people, tend to be pretty compassionate folks, right? Pretty empathetic people. And so I could see, you know, to your point, Sarah, that fatigue could set in, right? If you don't take care of yourself, and if you don't have the supportive supervisors that Chelsea described too, and options to grow, you know, and maybe transition to different positions, the things that keep us alive professionally, right?
Mm-hmm. And how Chesley had also explained, like being open and willing to see the different areas, but also being open to yourself and saying it's okay if you need to go to a different area. So I kind of explained how I fell in love with mental health with the CCS program. And I went into CLTS and I felt like I was failing because I didn't have the compassion. And I had to really step back and say, okay, it's okay. That's not your area. What was your area and how can you get back to that area so that I could feel successful and excited about what I was doing.
Great. So is there anything else that you'd want to tell us about your career path and how you discovered your purpose before I head into the concluding question?
I don't know if I have anything else.
I think additionally, it's just good maybe to also talk to different professors to see what your school has to offer. So part of what I left out with my journey is that UW Green Bay had a child welfare emphasis that they offered. And it was additional classes. But in return, if you took those additional classes, then you had your last year of school paid for if you went into a county child welfare area. So I did that mostly because I was like, well, that sounds good. I can have schooling paid for. But then I found an area that I fell in love with. So if I hadn't actually talked to professors to see what options were available for me, I wouldn't have taken that path. I probably would have stayed down working with elderly, working in a hospital, working with hospice. And then that just opened me up to an area that I fell in love with. So I think one of the biggest things is just figuring out what options are available because there are so many in social work. And Chelsea had talked about having her master's degree. I don't. I have my bachelor's. I don't know if I would have told my younger self to go get my master's because at that point in time, mental health wasn't my forte. And then I fell in love with it and have had many people tell me I need to get my master's so that I can do therapy. But my younger self, I don't know if I would have told me to do that because that wasn't where I was at. But just knowing the different areas that you can work in and what you need for that is extremely important so that when you're finding things you're passionate about, you can really work in those areas. So like for a master's, you need your master's degree in school social work if you want to be a social worker in schools. Or therapy, you need your master's degree if you want to be a therapist. Some hospitals require a master's degree, some hospitals don't, some require a bachelor's degree. So there are so many areas in social work, and just making sure that you take field placements in the areas you're most interested in so you know how much schooling you need to kind of do your passion.
And I think, Sarah, to kind of piggyback what you said about reaching out to professors, I also think reaching out to community agencies. There have been quite a few times where we have had students reach out to social workers to do an interview to say, hey, tell me about your day. Tell me what it's like to be a social worker at the county. And social workers really enjoy doing those interviews. Social workers are really passionate about what they do and they want to share what they do with other people. So I would say don't be afraid. You know, if you think you might be interested in being a therapist, there are so many agencies in our community that you could reach out to and just say, hey, can you just talk to me for 15 to 30 minutes about what you do, what you love, some struggles that you might have. So that is something, Sarah, you kind of triggered me with that one.
And along with that, I think it would be good to even ask social workers, like, what is the best part of your day? What is the most challenging part of your day? When I initially did social work, there were things that occurred that I was not prepared for. And had I had maybe sat down with a social worker and heard real stories, I would have been better prepared. I did fine. but I would have been better prepared. And some things make you giggle, and some things, maybe stressful, but always having those conversations are helpful.
Yeah, and I think sometimes I remember when I was in school, one of the requirements that we had was to attend an AA or NA meeting. And at that time, it felt so uncomfortable for me. I remember reaching out to talk to the leader of the group to say, hey, can I attend? And you go around and you do introductions. And there wasn't an uncomfortable piece initially, but really, I learned so much from that experience. And when I think of being a social worker, there are some really uncomfortable conversations that I've had. There are some really uncomfortable, just kind of day-to-day things that can happen. But I still think back now, it's been 10 years probably since I attended that AA group, but just feeling comfortable with being uncomfortable, maybe.
Mhm. And something that might also be helpful, we talked about like reaching out to different community members and social workers and interviewing them, is volunteering. If there's an area you're passionate in working in, seeing if there is a volunteer opportunity. If you can't get a placement with them, maybe there's a volunteer opportunity. And I wish I would have had that advice when I was going through school, to try some different areas that may have been successful for me, or that I would have found exciting.
And yet, I think you made a really important point early on when we were talking about this question, Sarah, when you said that what you know now, you really couldn't have known when you started on this career path, right? That you had to have some experience to know what else you wanted to know and what else you wanted to experience. So it's sitting in that discomfort, right? Of the discomfort of not knowing, but just kind of going along for the ride, right? The journey.
Right. Absolutely.
So, Sarah, you started to talk about the last thing I want to ask you guys about, and that is if you could go back in time and have a conversation with your younger self, maybe not even always just about like career choice, but just if you could go back and talk to your younger self, what would you tell him? Well, you're both hers. What would you tell yourself if you could go back and have a conversation with yourself, your younger self? In general, not even necessarily career specific. Chelsea, you want to get us started?
Sure. So I would say with this one, Sarah talked a little bit about it, but really self-care. I never really thought a lot about self-care. And when I first started in social work doing child protective services, there are some very sad things that I heard. There's things where certain stories, like I would go home at night, I would think about them. I would wake up in the middle of the night wondering if kids were safe. I really did not take very good care of myself. And it wasn't until somebody pointed it out to me saying like, hey, you've been a little moody lately. I noticed some changes with you. What's going on? And I think just knowing that it's okay to have those feelings, it's okay to take a break from work and to take care of yourself, spend time with your family, with your friends, whatever it is that makes you happy, do that and take care of yourself, because we really can't help other people if we ourselves are not in a good place.
Sarah, what would you tell your younger self?
I think to kind of mirror off self-care is also just good, positive self-talk. When you go into social work, there may be new things that you are learning. And I think the bigger picture of social work is you're dealing with other people's lives and you're working with other people. And just knowing that what you're doing is the best that you can do, or the best information that you have right now, and not doubting yourself. I think in areas, whether it be like I can apply that even to parenting, is just having good, positive self-talk that I am doing a good job as a parent and I'm doing what I need to do even while my child is having a tantrum. I had talked about how before the meeting even started, my 4-year-old was having a meltdown and I didn't know if I'd be able to make it here on time. And just having that good positive self-talk to get you through different situations or to give you the confidence that you need to be successful, whether it's in the job, in relationships, that's something really important to wire your brain to have is that good positive self-talk, and to really have that across the board in all areas of your life can be helpful.
That is good advice. I think we are often really hard on ourselves, needlessly hard on ourselves. And I feel like at 53, I think I'm 53, if I could go back and talk to my like 18-year-old self, my 19-year-old self, I would say, man, lighten up on yourself, Anne. Give yourself a break.
I completely agree with you. I know that I'm hard on myself. And I know when I watch this, I'm gonna be like, oh my gosh, Chelsea. I don't know, but something to work on, I suppose.
Well, then we'll help you. Lighten up on yourself, Chelsea. It's okay. It's all good. Yeah. Okay. Any final thoughts? You guys have been awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thank
thank you for inviting us.
Well, so I appreciate that you've shared your experiences with us very much so. And I want to thank our viewers for their suggestions for professionals that we should interview. I'll just remind them that we have a designated email address, career.conversations@uwsp.edu. So we'll take feedback and further suggestions at that email. So thank you for joining us, both of you. Appreciate it greatly.
Thank you.
Have a great day. All right. Bye-bye.